Hello, my name is Bob Kagan, and wow, this is hard to do. You have to be twisting around in all directions. I'll do my best to look in your direction sometimes too. And I'm going to be moderating this panel, which is on political Islam and human rights. I'll say a few words at the beginning, but first let me introduce our two distinguished panelists. We're very honored and pleased that Mr. Zied Ladhari has come all the way from Tunisia to join us this morning. Really appreciate that. He's a member of the Constituent Assembly and of the Political Bureau of al-Nahdha, the largest party in Tunisia's coalition government. And he's going to be making the main presentation on this subject. And then responding will be Robin Wright, who needs no introduction around here. She is perhaps one of the most prominent journalists, not perhaps, certainly one of the most prominent journalists American journalists working in the Middle East, and knows everyone and has seen everything and has written for every publication. I'm sure you've all read her work, and she'll be responding. The topic is, as one might say, topical. The question of the compatibility of political Islam and democracy is one that is certainly, being put on test right now in Egypt and Tunisia and elsewhere. I can say that it's pretty apparent here in the United States that there is a very high degree of skepticism that political Islam and democracy and human rights are compatible. You read an increasing number of articles in the American press, and it's left, right, and center, as far as I'm concerned. This issue knows no ideological boundaries. I'm sort of stunned myself at the degree to which, based on a brief period in Egypt, many American scholars and policy advisors are almost prepared to write off political Islam as being compatible with democracy. There's a certain, I would say, rush to conclusion here. I myself am a little bit more optimistic and would like to give things a little bit more time before rushing to that conclusion. But in any case, it is a question which Congress is going to be dealing with when it comes to aid to the region. And it's really, I think, it's one of the most profound questions of our time. So it's a great pleasure. I'm really looking forward to hearing what both our panelists have to say. And let me now turn it over to Zied. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very delighted today to be here with you, and I would like to thank you and to thank Human Rights First for offering us this great opportunity and this extraordinary meeting to meet together and to discuss with this distinguished assembly the current challenges in the global world, and especially the changes in Arab world, and in light of the rise of the ascendance of some political parties with Islamic reference or Islamic background. It seems paradoxical to some observers that after the Arab Spring, the Arab people has expressed two things who are supposed to be in contradiction. On the one hand, the Arab Spring reflects the deep and keen desire to topple dictatorial regimes in the region and to establish a democratic and a democratic state. On the other hand, it expresses a majoritarian will to delegate the mission of building this state to the Islamic forces or to the Islamic parties, these political parties with this Islamic reference. These forces are accused as having an ambivalent approach to human rights. This would mean that the Arab Spring brought to power these people, and at the same time brought to power people who are not maybe reflecting this keen desire to human rights. How can we understand this phenomena? How can we understand this paradox? I would like to say some preliminary remarks about this. First of all, political Islam is not a homogeneous reality. Political parties with Islamic background or Islamic reference are not a monolithic force. This trend englobes forces with a real and deep desire to establish democratic states and institutions. So we have to distinguish between these truly democratic forces within this Islamic movement and others who are less democratic or not democratic. Second thing I would like to emphasize is that the problem with this kind of approach is that is focusing mainly or exclusively on ideology. It is not seeing the sociologic reality, the complexity of the sociologic reality. It is making analysis on the basis of what these people, what these parties with Islamic background or Islamic reference are supposed to think, given their Islamic reference, but not seeing the complexity of the reality of how do they behave on the ground. And generally practice, I would say, is more progressive than thoughts, than ideas, and especially with respect to this issue. The third point I would like to emphasize is that when we talk about Islamic forces threatened as a threat to human rights, we have some kind of conception, we have some kind of static conception of democratization, I would say. We are not seeing this progressive and this transitional process of establishing human rights and setting up institutional respect in human rights and democracy. So I would like to say that we have to be more attentive, to pay more attention to these dynamics and to see the direction of this movement than having a kind of static analysis of the situation. This being said, I would like to tell you some words about, the context in Tunisia, because as I said, every country and every movement has its specificities and is special, is not, like others. And I would say that Tunisia now is facing big challenges, is in a historical period. All eyes are fixed on Tunisia since it was in this country that the Arab Spring was started. The current process in Tunisia will be determined not only for Tunisian, but perhaps even determine the fate of the Arab region as a whole. We expect a lot from this experience. We expect a lot from this transition. We want it to succeed. and to build a model of, to build an example, a model which successfully combines human dignity, freedoms, social and economic rights, rule of law, and national and Islamic local values. This is the model we would like to offer to the region, and we hope that other Arab countries will have the desire to emulate. As a member of the National Constituent Assembly, I can tell you a few words about the drafting process now, the constitutional drafting process. And I have to assure you that the draft constitution enshrines and upholds the key civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights, affirming freedoms, liberties, and rights that Tunisians have long been denied. This includes article. I can give you some indication about the draft constitution, which state guarantees the physical integrity and dignity and prohibits all forms of torture. The state guarantees freedom of belief, of conscience, and religious practice, guarantees the right to privacy. The state shall secure for its citizens individual and public rights, and shall provide them with conditions for a decent life. Freedom of opinion, expression, information and publication, as well as freedom of assembly and demonstration shall be guaranteed. So I would say the key public and individual rights are guaranteed under this constitution. In this draft constitution also, we have a clear stipulation that the state will be a civil state. A civil state based on citizenship and equality before the law. All powers shall be vested in the people, which shall exercise them through their freely elected representatives and through referendums. So as you can see, we have really a modern constitution which recognizes and acknowledges the major human rights, freedoms, and liberty, the universal human rights, and this is a good thing, I think, for Tunisia. I have to tell you that gender equality also is recognized. We have a special stipulation on that, which indicates clearly that there is no any possible discrimination between men and women. We had some controversy about some concept of complementarity, which was advocated by some of my colleagues here, my colleagues in the Assembly. But this proposal has not been enshrined in the Constitution, in the draft Constitution, as it is ambiguous and can lead to discriminatory approach. And we decided not to include some, kind of ambiguous things in the Constitution. Our party has affirmed its commitment to support also maintaining this progressive family law, this personal status code we have in Tunisia, which provides for progressive rights for women. So, as you can imagine, this is an important step in establishing democracy in the region. in established democracy in Tunisia and guaranteeing or respect of human rights. But we have also to have in mind that this kind of provisions are not sufficient and not enough, as you can imagine, to implement these key principles. I would say that the transition is now facing a very delicate time in Tunisia, because the main reasons of this revolution in Tunisia was establishing a state who recognized human dignity and recognizes economic and social rights for its people. So we have, as you know, a high rate of unemployment, especially within the young people, and we are facing a lot of very important challenges in the economic and social scene, I would say. So it is important for us today to succeed in fulfilling this aspiration of our people. If we don't succeed on this side, if we don't succeed in guaranteeing to these people more a decent life in the country, if we are not succeed in guaranteeing to these young people, especially, the possibility to have a job, we will have really major risks in guaranteeing the political transition and in guaranteeing the success of the success of the democratization process. And this is the challenge now we are facing. We made a lot in terms of democratization, in terms of guaranteeing civil and political rights to our people, but this is at risk. What we made is at risk if we don't guarantee the social and economic rights to our people. And for that reason, I think that the important thing now is to succeed on this level and to offer to our people and to our young people, especially, these possibilities of a decent life in the country. I would like to say that in this regard, the support of the West and the support of the United States on both sides is very important. Supporting democracy in terms of political and civil rights is important by granting, some kind of technical assistance to reform, to implement the institutional reforms we need now in Tunisia to guarantee respect of these constitutional human rights. Reforming the judiciary, reforming the security forces system is very important. And we need for this an important, assistance from our friends, our partners, to help the country make significant changes in this regard. On the other hand, I think that supporting Tunisia and the region in terms of economic also, economic and social reforms, it's very important because, as you know, the transition process is by nature is anti-economic, anti-growth, because we have a lot of uncertainties, we have a lot of instability, and this make it harder for the government to fulfill the aspiration of people in terms of economic growth and creating jobs and enhancing the economic and social situation of our people. So for this period, the foreign support is very important, and in this regard, the foreign policy of the administration in this second term, I would say that this foreign policy will take into account the importance of helping these countries, not in aids, but in developing tourism and investment, and this would be very important to succeed in both sides. So I would say that as a party and as a movement, we suffered a lot for decades from persecution, from dictatorship. We are really keen, and we have a strong commitment to implement human rights and to respect human rights in the region. But we need our friends and our partners to help us in this process, and I think that this would be a win-win strategy for our partners, because we need to succeed together, and we need to enter the human rights community and to establish together to succeed together in this mission. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that very interesting presentation. I'm sure it sparks a lot of questions. I must say my first question is that listening to you speak, I wouldn't know that you're a representative of an Islamic party, because there was not a single mention of any religious objective whatsoever. And it made me think about parties in Europe that are called Christian Democrats these days. I think the Christian used to mean more than it does now, and I wonder whether there's no particular meaning to the fact that you are an Islamic party. Maybe we can get into that. I mean, Robin, I know I know you probably have a prepared response and also responding to what Zied just said, but it would be good if we could sort of join the issue a little bit and talk about what at least some of the potential contradictions might be between, and I won't specify Islamic, but any party devoted to religious purposes versus some of these, human rights and democracy questions. These are tensions that have existed in Christian countries. They're tensions that exist in Israel. So there's nothing new here, but I think it's worth maybe delving a little bit into that. But please, thanks.
All right, let me make three broad points before we get into the specifics. And the first one is that for the last 2 centuries, there's been an enormous debate about one central issue, and that is personal freedoms versus Islam. Islam literally means submit, as in the submit to the will of God. There has been among the truly devout a belief that there is one true path to belief, to leading your life, and even in politics. And one of the most interesting things that has happened, particularly over the last 2 years, but it has gradually evolved, this is not something that came out of the blue, is this sense that the argument is being settled in the 21st century, or it's moving in a different direction in the 21st century. And it's reflected in a story an encounter I had with a young Egyptian named Ibrahim Hudaybi. Ibrahim's very interesting because both his grandfather and his great-grandfather were supreme leader of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And he was its first and most prominent blogger when the Muslim Brotherhood went on the web. And then he had a falling out with the Muslim Brotherhood and he left. And I was talking to him about, his way of thinking, and he said it's reflected in this conversation I had with my grandfather when he was dying, who was, the supreme leader. And it was over this issue of personal freedom and religion. And his grandfather argued that you could not be free, really free, unless you did it through religion, through your religious belief. That's how you gain freedom. And Ibrahim argued with his father that you can't really be a true believer unless you have freedom first to come to that belief. Very profound. And it's reflected in the different generations. And I think this is what we're beginning to see in this, not just the democratic political systems, but this culture of democracy that has emerged among Islamic parties. And I have been riveted, and this is my second point, by the evolution of a full spectrum of Islamic parties. In Tunisia, you see it with al-Nahdha, the Renaissance Party, on one end, and the new Salafi parties. There are two of them. Islah, which means reform, and a smaller party. I don't even know what the name of the smaller party is, but and how that this tension is actually so central to the bigger point that the parties don't like each other very much. But al-Nahdha made a point of trying to get the Salafis to work within the political system rather than from outside it, even though they disagree in terms of their goals. The same thing is mirrored in Egypt, where you have the Muslim Brotherhood, which won 49% of the seats in the new parliament, and the Noor, after 84 years of trying, and the new Noor party, which is a Salafi party, had been formed less than a year earlier. And the two, I went to see the new members of parliament in January this year, after the election. And the Muslim Brotherhood was shaking its head, the folks I talked to, and they said, these Noor party guys, they're extreme, they're naive, they really don't know, modern politics. And I went to see the members of the who'd been elected from the Noor party to parliament, and they were saying, oh, those guys in the Muslim Brotherhood, they're yuppies. They've compromised Islamic principle. And so there is this very interesting tension. And I think in many ways this is the most dynamic political factor in the region, because the different Islamist groups are trying to figure out the role of personal freedoms, the relationship with Islam. And that, I think, will probably be the most important development over the next decade, if not generation. The third point, and then I'll deal with Bob's very important question, and that is that we in the West tend to look at elections as the most important barometer of change. Who are the new parties? What do they want? When in fact it is the writing of the Constitution that is the most important factor in determining the new order. But constitutions are imperfect. As we discovered in our own Constitution, we, in the first 15 years, introduced 12 amendments. And for those of you who've seen Lincoln, you know that it was another 60 years before we got to the 13th Amendment that outlawed slavery. And then it was another century before we got to the Voting Rights Act that actually ensured that minorities were able to vote. Constitutions aren't perfect from the beginning. They are an organic process. And I think that what we're seeing emerge in the last week with a controversial constitution in Egypt, what's due, I think, by February in Tunisia, its constitution, right, February? although there's a draft out now, I think, as a general draft, yeah. That these are the beginning of a process, and that we have to understand that these are newly democratic societies, and that there are a lot of players, not just the Islamists, who want to weigh in. In many ways, we're seeing revolutions within the revolution as we kind of deal with what is the new order. On Bob's question, how does this play out on specific issues? You mentioned too briefly the issue of women's rights, and this is where you can begin to see an evolution, kind of working out the process. And remember, these are very small bodies, the constituent assemblies, who are made up of inexperienced politicians who've not been engaged in a process like this before. And they're groping. And some will flex their muscles in ways that they'll kind of bulldoze or bully through ideas. And then they're met by resistance, a backlash, people, and they begin to say, okay, well, maybe. And this tug and pull is a process that is so new, and is going to continue to play out, but it played out particularly on this issue of women's rights in Tunisia. And Tunisia had the most progressive policy on women under the ancien regime. And there are a lot of women in Tunisia who are very worried about what rights they will have. And al-Nahdha, which includes many different strains of thought, I will tell you, as does the Muslim Brotherhood, some of them push the idea of a woman being a complement to a man. You mentioned it as the complementary idea, but this is one that really opened the way for the idea that women could do, men could do certain things and women could do other things, that they were the complement. And there was a huge backlash from both inside the country, among some Islamists as well, but also from the outside world, from liberals and secular democratic forces inside the country. And the original al-Nahdha proponents of this idea pulled back. And the language in the draft constitution calls for equality among gender and ethnic groups and religious groups. No discrimination. Now, there are other clauses in the Constitution, or one other, that is a bit more worrisome in terms of how it might qualify women's rights. But it is very interesting that there is, as I said, it's an organic process, and we underrate, I don't know whether flexibility is the right word, but the ability to change people's minds. When I went to see a couple in Egypt who were the only couple to run for the Muslim Brotherhood, both husband and wife, I said to him, I understand there are 4 factions within the Muslim Brotherhood. And he said, 4? There are at least 20. And my wife and I both ran as members of the Muslim Brotherhood, and we don't agree on most issues. So it was a very interesting illustration of how this democratic culture that's being born is as important as the idea of democracy in defining the new order. And I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you both. We'll open up the questions, but I'll take the prerogative as moderator, at least to begin the questioning. And let me press you a little bit on this, Zied. I mean, obviously you've come here, you're speaking to a human rights conference, and you're emphasizing that, but you did not mention anything about any religious principles that might be part of your party's mission. And I'm wondering if you could just flesh that out a little bit for us. I mean, after all, you are an Islamic party, and I assume the word has some meaning. And so I'm just curious if you could sort of fill out the picture a little bit for us.
Yeah. Actually, we have been asked the same question when we did our program. Because when we did our program and presented our program before the elections, people look at the program and said, okay, it's great, but it's not Islamic. We don't see Islam. And what this Islamic reference means. And this is really a very good and right question. Actually, I would say that the difference between an Islamic party and not Islamic party is the starting point. I mean, for me, I'm Democrat. I believe in human rights. I believe in state based on citizenship. The difference is that my starting point is Islamic. I have this Islamic reference, which for me, the sense of that, the meaning of that is that I can be a Democrat without being less Muslim. I think that we can find an Islamic an Islamic explanation, an Islamic reason for democracy, because I think that democracy is not a system who is anti-Islamic or is different in terms of conception with my Islamic conception. So I think that this is really the difference. So when we did our program is to help people obtain jobs, to enhance the economic and social situation, to establish a new democratic state institutions based on rule of law and so on. And for me, all of these principles are my understanding of Islam can give me to these results who can be shared by other people with secular background.
Okay, well that's interesting. Well, let me just
and this is maybe the difference with some other people, other trends of Islamic who don't see who don't have this approach, because they think that democracy, for example, is not compatible with Islam. We cannot be Muslim and Democrat at the same time. So within the Islamic movement, we have such important differences with other parties who think, for example, that democracy is just a means to obtain power, to impose the majoritarian will, and then to change the rules. It's just one ticket, It's obtain democracy. But in our thinking, we consider that we are truly democratic. We consider that democracy is not just the rule of majority; it's also the rights of minorities. So this is, I think, the difference between us also and the other Islamic parties who are also maybe involved in the political scene.
Well, and that's the perfect lead into the question that I wanted to pose to Robin, because we don't really have a very strong skeptic here on the panel. So let me try to put on the guise of a skeptic and make that point, because I think, as you well know, there are many here in the United States, both in Congress and also writing about these subjects, who believe the following. One is that, let's take Egypt for a second. The Brotherhood is just using democracy as a means of gaining power, and then once they've consolidated power, they will begin to erode some of these rights in order to fulfill their vision. And after all, they've been many decades expressing a certain view of what Egyptian society should look like, and it's a very Islamic view. And are we supposed to believe that now all of a sudden they've given that up and that they're going to be compromising? And really, isn't, when they speak to people in the West, they say one thing, but when they speak in Arabic to their own supporters, they say something completely different. And really, this whole thing is just a kind of kabuki play. And pretty soon we'll find out. And I think some have already concluded we're already finding out. So, what is your answer to me in that skeptical mode?
I will join your skepticism. I think the proof is always in the pudding, and there's a lot to be proven, particularly after President Morsi's colossal mistake, perhaps in process as much as in substance, in assuming enormous number of powers largely out of fear of what the opposition, what the Ancien regime, what might do. I think we look at Iran as the primary example of this. Iran has a constitution that is based on French and Belgian law. It had an Islamic veneer added in the end, in part because the liberal, democratic, secular parties that were part of the transition who marched against the Shah were so divided about what they wanted in the new order that they introduced over 6,400 amendments to the new constitution. And this led to an enormous friction and eventually to clashes that, that led to the deaths of a lot of top officials. And it was at that moment that Ayatollah Khomeini came back from Qom and said, wait a minute, he'd banned the clerics from being part of the political system, and he turned around and said, we must be present. We must have powers in order to be a check and balance against all the democratic chaos that had been created. And that is this danger of democratic chaos. And we have been now stuck with this Islamic system in Iran for 32 years to the detriment of tens of millions of Iranians and producing some of the deepest tensions in the Middle East and with the outside world. So there's a lot of reason for skepticism. These guys have a lot to prove, whether it's in comparatively moderate Tunisia, in Egypt, where you have the mother of all Islamist movements. The Muslim Brotherhood was founded by a 22-year-old school teacher who mobilized a half dozen disgruntled trade workers on the Suez Canal. And today you have 84 branches in dozens of countries with hundreds of millions of members. And, and one of the offshoots being Hamas and some of those who have turned to violence. So they have a lot to prove in their tactics, in their goals. I think there is the potential for this to go either way. One of the interesting things, and Bob didn't mention it, is that we had lunch yesterday with 3 senior Egyptian officials who will remain unnamed. But it was very interesting that in covering whether it was the Constitution, foreign policy, or economic, the word Islam never once came up, never. And it's a kind of interesting component that what used to be the center of the debate isn't there, and that when it came to issues like Gaza and the peace process, that their language on the peace process was no different than you might have heard during the Mubarak era in terms of the reality of Israel's existence, trying to get a genuine peace process going, and so forth, that created a 2-state solution and that guaranteed Israel's right to exist. So evolution, as an historian, which is what I am, I look at the forces of history and evolution. There's a long way to go in this evolution, which is an embryonic stage, and it could go either way. But I'm not like you writing it off yet.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, now, as I say, I'll try to, if there's questions over here, I'll try to bend my neck around and see them, but I see one hand right there. I guess you probably, as usual, should state your name and your organization and keep your question in the form of a question.
Thank you. My name is Jo Alfis. I actually work for Human Rights First, and I'm very interested in taking further the discussion between relations of church and state, or mosque and state, in Tunisia. One key constitutional test is, and there was discussion about this in Tunisia, was the option of inserting a blasphemy clause, a clause where it would be deemed criminal if there is any insult to religion. Now, we have done extensive work on this. We've reported on this across 100 countries. We've 18 countries, 100 cases, and our consistent research has showed that blasphemy clauses seem to be incompatible with democracy. They violate many rights of human beings. The state tends to persecute religious minorities. Freedom of expression is eroded. Sometimes people settle personal scores by using blasphemy clauses as a pretext. And people have been thrown into jail. People have been murdered. And I would like to ask you, as a member of the Islamist Party, if you what your position on blasphemy is, and if you believe that blasphemy is compatible with democracy in Tunisia. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, we had this proposal within the Assembly to include a provision in the draft constitution regarding this blasphemy. Our decision was to give up this, to reject this proposal, and not to include in the constitution, in the draft constitution, any mention of this. We think that actually the important thing is to take into account the importance of this dimension of respect to others' beliefs and to other thoughts. We think that it is important to think and to implement rules within society that enshrines this idea of that human being relationships and social peace is based on respect between individuals, and the respect means also the fact that I respect your ideas, that I not insult you, that not I insult your ideas. But we think that the idea of having some kind of blasphemy in the constitution is not an appropriate idea, because this would create problem in terms of respect of freedom of expression also, and freedom of, so we have to distinguish between the two levels, freedom of expression, freedom of thinking, and at the same time we have to find the rules within this, I would say within this approach, how also to implement and to find the right rules to implement respect between the different people in society.
Let me add something very quickly. It's the most sensitive issue, I think, even more important than the role of Islam and women's and minority rights. And the Egyptian constitution does have in it a clause that makes it illegal to insult Islam or the Prophet Muhammad. Now, with all fairness, I went to see Sheikh Anoushi in Tunisia last month. I've seen him twice this year, and we talked about this issue. And his idea is that you should not put it in a constitution, but you should have a law. And so I would fully anticipate that you will find this becoming a controversy in Tunisia. But his idea was also that the goal is really to make this not just about Islam, but to go to the United Nations and get some kind of resolution in the General Assembly that stipulates that no one should insult any religion, so that it is not seen as something that Muslims are overly sensitive just about their religion, but that introduces the idea of respect for other faiths as well. So on this count, Tunisia is more open-minded, but I suspect that elsewhere you will find this one of the most difficult issues for us to accept.
I have to say just one word about
Please.
this. Actually, we have a law that it is forbidden to insult people or to insult people, other people beliefs. We don't have this article of blasphemy as we can understand this here in the West.
I saw a hand. Yeah. Sorry.
Nadine Wahab, the Cairo Institute for Human Rights Studies. And one of the issues that I find with this discussion is we have a difficult time distinguishing between the Islamophobia versus tolerance framing of the conversation in the US, and then the looking at or taking a nuanced view of human rights in Islamic or Muslim majority countries. I think we get really confused on this, and I really want to ask the panelists, where do you see this this line, and how do you feel that how do you see that we should be able to distinguish between these two conversations? Because when we talk about Islam and human rights, I don't think that I think it comes from a very Western perspective. The question itself is that Islam, or there is a distinction between Islam and other religions, versus looking at each government and how it assesses and how it works forward and how it puts certain laws on the books, and really removing the frame of Islam, and so it no longer becomes contentious. And so the distinction here I find very problematic, because we do fall in the US frame, and then we all fall into the perspective of defending Islam versus supporting or attacking Islam.
That seems like a very good point. Robin, do you want to?
No, thanks. In some ways, I fully agree with the point you're making. And because Islamophobia is so dominant to our mindset, because of our experience, whether it was the Iranian Revolution, the hostage ordeal, the rise, and I lived in Beirut during those years, the attacks on the American embassies and the Marine compound that then, leading all the way through 9/11, that is our frame of reference now for 30 plus years, and it's hard to go beyond it. And in dealing even with a sophisticated group that deals with human rights issues, you still have to frame some of your responses. And that's too bad, because it shows just how deep the gap is between our cultures. I actually will put in a plug for a book I edited this year called The Islamists Are Coming, Who They Really Are, trying to deal with just this question. And we decided we wanted to educate people, so we put the whole book on the web, and it's at theislamistarecoming.com. And we have, for example, put the Egyptian constitution on, and we have at the bottom as well a comparison with the 1971 constitution and the current constitution on key points, which is particularly useful in understanding the language. But what can I say? Fear is the deepest defining force in our understanding of what's happening in the Islamic world, but also within the Islamic world, between those who think that they're more forward-looking because they are secular or liberal, and those who are Islamist who think that they're really reflecting the new political reality. And just getting beyond that fear factor, which defines what's happening in Egypt today, which led to the violence after the film in September at American facilities, American embassies in the region, is to me the toughest part of getting into the 21st century, getting beyond, reestablishing relations. And I wish I had a better answer.
I'm just wondering, in a way, I think in fairness to people in the West who look at it this way, Islamists themselves sometimes, if not frequently, talk in a transnational way. They don't claim that there's no connection between Islam in one country and another, and in the more, sometimes they even talk about caliphates and things like that. And so, but it does raise the question now, because if you look at Egypt's behavior, for instance, in this Gaza crisis, it does seem that Hamas, at least, was counting on transnational Islamic solidarity. And while there certainly may have been some of that, there was also an Egyptian leader looking out for Egyptian interests. And I guess one question I might myself pose to Zied in this regard, and you, by the way, you may also want to respond to the question already, but does an Islamic party in Tunisia think of itself in a kind of pan-Islamic way, or is it focused? I'm going to guess your answer, especially based on what you've already said, or is it focused exclusively on Tunisia's problems as opposed to the larger question of Islam?
Thinking and practice about this question has evolved. And initially, when this kind of movement started in the 70s of the last century, it was the idea of Islamic world, and Islamic solidarity was really very important and very, with significant presence in the thinking of the actors of this Islamic movement at this time. But as I said earlier, we don't have to minimize the importance of practice and the importance of reality and local reality. When you are when you are actively involved in politics in your country, and you have to address the major issues your country is facing and the major challenges you are facing, and especially now when we are in the government, you have to be more, close to your reality. The ideal of having some kind of relationship, specific relationship with the Islamic world is still here, but the reality is that we are now talking about some kind of, partnership, about the idea of strong cooperation, but not the idea about having, a state which englobes all of these different nations. So the national reality is now a fact, and very important fact, and it's now a kind of established thinking in the movement, at least in Tunisia.
Can I tell one quick anecdote?
Yep.
I went to see the head of the Muslim Brotherhood Party in Libya last month, and I asked him, how much do you share the Muslim Brotherhood agenda from your Egyptian counterparts? And he said, no, don't confuse us. We're very different in terms of what we want. Now, one of the striking things about it, however, is that across the region you find the Islamist parties not having Islam in their title. They're called Justice and Freedom, Freedom and Development, Freedom and Construction, Justice and Construction. I mean, they all have this idea, but it is the economic agenda, the idea of justice and development that is so central to what they're talking about now in terms of rights. We haven't focused on this, what was the theme of the uprisings, which was social justice, and now economic rights. I went to Sidi Bouzid, which was the birthplace of the uprising 2 years ago this month, and I went to the same street corner where the fruit vendor set himself on fire, and I talked to the fruit vendors who were there today, and I said, okay, how do you feel about what's happened? And they said, we have far more freedoms and far fewer jobs, and they were not happy. So these are the pressures, the realities that a lot of these parties have to deal with.
Absolutely.
I think we've sparked questions, including from this side. Please.
Good morning. My name is Scott Morgan. I'm a freelance writer, and I'm also working with Falcon International. I want to change the dynamic of the question a little bit. What about how do we interact with people who are Islamists and want to achieve power, but have such a disdain or distrust of the democratic process that they feel like their voices can be effectively be heard through insurgencies and other acts of terror instead of going through the elected process like we're seeing in Tunisia right now and in Egypt? They figure that they have to go and use other means, taking violence to another level like we're seeing in Mali and in Nigeria.
And the question is, how do we
as activists interact with those people? Make sure that they're
carefully, I would say, but
We don't.
I mean, as a government, I don't think we do. But
I didn't hear the question, please.
I think the question, if I may, and if I get it wrong, is for those who have not chosen or do not have the opportunity to choose a democratic means of fulfilling their Islamic goals, but have chosen instead insurgency and violence. Am I doing okay? How do we relate to those people? My answer was carefully, but you may have a different answer.
No, I agree, absolutely. I think that we had ourselves this situation before, removing dictatorship in Tunisia, and we think that we have to change things with the pacific means. It's important to have this kind of pacific approach to political change, and we think that for many decades the approach of Europe and of United States towards the question was really problematic in our region, because helping and supporting democratic change in the region is an important thing, and important for the image of the West, and maybe one of the reasons of ambivalence towards human rights and democratic values is the idea that the West had always this kind of double standards and ambivalence in applying and defending these values. So I think that now we understood this lesson, and the United States and Europe have now a strong commitment, we hope, to defend and promote democracy in the region.
We don't deal with any party that doesn't renounce violence. Simple. And one thing we haven't talked about today are the Salafis, and these are the parties that are perhaps the most worrisome in the region, because they are taking advantage of the democratic system in some cases, and yet not renouncing violence. Now, there are a diversity of Salafis as well. There are scholarly Salafis, scientific Salafis. In Egypt, something called the Costa Salafi. It's based on the name of a popular coffee shop where the young gather to debate a lot of these political issues. But there are those in Mali, in Libya, in Benghazi, and in Tunis at the American Embassy, who have taken to violence. And obviously those are the ones we don't deal with. But when it comes to questions like what we do about the attack on the American mission in Benghazi, when I was in Libya, the one thing they wanted to talk about over and over and over was, please don't let the U.S. use drones against whoever did it. Let us bring these guys to justice. Let us make the process legitimate. And so while we need to be careful, we need to be measured and thoughtful in our response to those who turn to violence, and work with the governments, the new governments, to make sure that we don't marginalize or delegitimize them by being seen to be using our power, our force.
Yes, ma'am. Wait for the mic. There it is.
Thank you. My name is Rula Al-Safar, and I'm a Muslim, and I'm from Bahrain. I'm one of the Bahraini medics. You have provoked, I'm going to be a devil advocate a little bit here today. When we talk about Islamic phobia, we need to think about who created the Islamic phobia. And it was created because of politics and their interest in the region. When we talk about what happened in the Iranian Revolution in Lebanon and 9/11, then I'm going to tell you the other way. What have left from Iraq and what happened after stating that there is a nuclear and they did not find any nuclear there, and it's left burned down. What happened to Afghanistan? What happened to Libya? What happened to Yemen? And now and Syria, and now the double standards of what's going on in Bahrain. I have to say, one way or the other, the American politics, not the people, I love the American people. The politics went with the rebels in Tunisia, supported the Libyans, supported the Yemen, because they didn't want the people who are ruling that area. What about Bahrain? It's the opposite. And we come and we talk about Salafis. Very interesting. Who created the Salafis? Who created Taliban? Is the money of the Saudis, which is supported by the Americans. And now we're just going like this. We have to start thinking about where's the origin? Why we don't have the phobia of Christianity in our world? We don't have it. Why we don't have the phobia of Judaism? We don't have it. We have Masons, we have Muslims, we have Jews, we have everybody in my country. But it's the opposite in your area, in this part of the world. And I think all it deals with politics. Thank you.
There was not a question in there, but by the way, I will tell you that in American history, there have been phobias of almost every single religion other than Protestantism. Certainly there was of Catholicism and Judaism and what have you, and Islam is just the latest. Yes, sir?
Yeah, Mark Hankins from the Solidarity Center.
Do you want a microphone so other people can hear you? There we go.
I'd like to return to the discussion of the relationship of providing jobs to people without them and without hope. I just received a report that there was an attack on the headquarters of the UGTT, which is the national trade union in your country, in Tunisia, today, by a group called the National League for the Protection of the Revolution, which some reports indicate is related to the ruling party. I'd like to talk in general. I don't think it's fair to have you react to that, but I'd like to talk in general about the ability and the willingness to encourage a fulsome discussion about how you get to those economic policies in an environment where there seems to be intolerance of that discussion.
Yeah, as I said, we have a delicate situation. It's not easy to deal with the transition period, and we have this, these people claiming jobs, claiming more better economic situation and social situation, and we have to deal with all of these kind of claims. We have to explain to people to be patient, but people major revolutions so are not. They are really impatient about their claims, and as I said, also the transition process in itself is complicates by nature the capacity of the government to address all of these challenges and to fulfill the aspiration of our people. The problem is, if you look to the debate in Tunisia, we have a problem with some kind of forces who didn't accept the results of the elections. Ideological reasons or political reasons, we have a problem with some forces who rejected the results, rejected politically, not legally, because they accepted the results and they recognized that it was fair and free elections. But they rejected the results of the elections because they think that it is impossible to accept the idea of being ruled by an Islamic party. And for this reason, we have a kind of special scheme in Tunisia. We had people who refused to be a member of the government because we proposed initially to have some kind of national union government and to include different parties, secular and Islamic, to work together to handle and to deal with this situation. But they refused the idea and they wanted to be a opposition, which is in our sense is not really a good idea and it's not appropriate in this context. We think that a transition period, a transition process needs a high degree of consensus between the different parties. It's the scheme of opposition and majority is not adapted, is not appropriate for this kind of process. And for this reason, we have a lot of political tensions in Tunisia now in reason of this history, in this story of opposition and majority, because opposition are playing as if they are in a stable in stable situation in very classical, traditional, well-established democracy and playing their role of opposition. Or it's not the case. Actually, it's not the case because we have a different situation, and as I said, we have this kind of transition process which needs all the parties and all the forces to work together to handle these challenges. So we have this over-politicization, we have of everything. So if you had this kind of incident, which I think can arrive in every place in the world, you have immediately a reaction from the opposition, and they will tell you that is related to the government, and this is the creation of government. So we have to keep in mind this idea of this tension between majority and opposition, and we have to look very carefully and to have to pay more attention to this kind of information. So as I said, we are dealing with situation. We think that is very difficult. We think that we need more support from our partners, from the West, from Europe, from the United States to help us, to help Tunisia, not the Islamic Party, but to Tunisian government to deal with all of these challenges. And we hope that the other forces will join the government. We are now discussing with other forces to join also the government and to build together this transition period. So we have to make some clarification about all of this and to pay attention to this information.
Can I just add one thing real quickly? To your point about the labor unions, the labor union in Tunisia is the most probably dynamic political opposition force in the country because the political alternatives are so weak. But you're finding this across the region in countries in transition, that labor strikes it's one thing that galvanizes people. It gives them a sense of purpose. It defines what the agenda is in a way that the political opposition hasn't been able to. So I think that you're going to find this repeated in a lot of places. At one point, Habib Bourguiba Avenue in Tunis is the place where a lot of the protests play out. And at one point, the businessmen went to al-Nahdha and said, "You've got to stop this because it's really bad for business." And so al-Nahdha said to the labor union, you can't protest here. And that then led to a bigger protest. So it creates a dynamic that are not easy for a lot of the new politicians to kind of figure out how to negotiate.
Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Francesca Overwater, and I work with the NGO Working Group for Women, Peace and Security at the UN. I just had a question about the democratization process throughout Tunisia in particular, because I think it is important to stay highly contextualized to specific countries and individual situations as much as possible, and to maintain the democratization process outside of just elections, but make sure that people themselves, not just political parties and leadership, feel ownership of the newly transition and process. And I was wondering what kind of mechanisms, what kind of outlets are people having for their voice on a more regular basis, and how do they project that? Is that formed more in an economic, social rights terms or Islamic values terms, or what seems to be resonating with people themselves? And I realize that's not a monolithic group, it's going to be varied. But what are the mechanisms to keep the democratization process going more regularly and keep it alive?
Yeah, as I said, the democratization, in terms of democratization, in terms of opening the political process and having, well-established democracy, we made a lot of significant steps. And the constitution, the draft constitution, is an important step in this direction. But the problem which would endanger this transition, democratic transition process, is the inability, this impossibility and the difficulty for the government to deal with the economic and social challenges we are facing today. So I think that people, if they don't see the economic results, the social and economic results of this politics, as you said, we have now more freedoms and more rights, but we have fewer jobs. And if people still see the situation like this, this would endanger the political transition, because people think that having established democracy, having this kind of rule of law principles, anti-corruption standards, and so on, is a means to have a more decent life and to have the ability to live in fast-growing economy and so on. So this is, I think, the important challenge for us, and for this we have to do a lot of work to be able to address appropriately this economic and social challenges, and at the same way to work on the cultural and I would say the mental side of this, to explain to people the importance of democratic values and the human rights and rule of law and civil state and so on, because we think that democracy is also culture, and in dictatorship it is very difficult to get this culture. But now we are working also on establishing this culture in our country.
Can I just add one economic factoid? In Tunisia, the unemployment among the young is 40%. And that's pretty much true right across the region, including in Saudi Arabia, even oil-rich countries. And the problem for Tunisia is half of those young have college degrees. They're quite capable, and they have expectations that are not just to get something that pays you a manual wage, but that actually gives you a sense of the future.
Okay, all the way over here.
Hi, my name is Mariam Al-Khawaja, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Gulf Center for Human Rights. I know that after we saw a new government come in power in Tunisia, we saw some very good steps forward, like, for example, signing on to the Convention Against Torture. But we have seen some very worrisome developments lately. We saw the beatings on the streets of protesters, especially youth and activists who came out to protest against some of the new changes that they didn't like in the new government. And very recently, we saw the use of the buckshot against protesters again. And the buckshot is something I'm very familiar with because I'm from Bahrain, and that's the second cause of death in Bahrain against protesters. And so my question is, with this growing frustration amongst the youth, especially the activist youth, almost every single Tunisian activist I personally know is very, very frustrated with the new government, and they feel like they're going to some extent backwards in that regard. So how is it that you're going to create a platform in which these youth feel like they have become a part of the country and they're not dealing with the same situation that they were dealing with under Ben Ali, which is going out to protest and to give an opinion and being beaten down for it? Thank you.
It's a quite delicate situation. I mean, transition is very, very special because this is a dynamic process, and in which you are not arrived to the well-established democracy. You left a dictatorship, but you are not still in democracy. So I think if we want to judge the situation in Tunisia, we have to keep in mind this idea that we are in a process of establishing democracy. We are not a well-established democracy. And this is not just a matter of political will. We have the political will to establish democracy. We voted on some laws to, as you said, to prevent from torture and to ensure respect of human rights. But ensuring full respect of human rights, it's also a matter of implementing the necessary institutional reforms. Reforming the security forces, reforming the judiciary. And when now the security forces deal with some kind of protest or demonstrations, as you indicated, it is really difficult for them without having the necessary training, without have this kind of institutional reform, or this kind of of equipment also to deal an appropriate way with this protest. It is very difficult to avoid some kind of problems or to have victims when have some kind of confrontation between security forces and people. So I think this is a more complex issue. We have a strong political willingness to establish these principles and to respect human rights, but we have to keep in mind the necessity of this huge, this strong work. We need to implement all the necessary institutional reforms to be more effective on this respect.
Can I just add, I disagree. I really worry that these new governments are going to keep saying transition, give us time, et cetera, and it becomes, it becomes the excuse to do anything. The ends justifies the means, and I'm very worried about all of these parties who say, well, we mean well, just trust us, and so forth. And I think your example is a very good one. And the fact that some of the new parties taking power are using some of the tactics of the old regime is very worrisome.
No, I don't agree, because look, the situation is very difficult. You have thousands of people working in security forces. For decades, these people were educated and were trained to deal with protest and demonstration in special way. They don't need the equipment you have in the West or the United States to deal with this protest and to protect themselves. So these people act in this way. We need absolutely time to explain and to train and to equip these people in manner that they can handle these protests in the appropriate way. When we have now a Minister of Interior who is from our party, but we have 50,000 of people who are recruited and hired and trained and educated by the Ben Ali regime and by the former regime. These people we can't by having just this political will, they will change in this kind of sector, especially security. Is very difficult. We have to implement a new culture for these security forces, and this is very difficult, and for sure it takes time.
Okay, I'm afraid we have time for just one more question. I apologize to those who aren't getting a chance, but please.
Elisa Massimino, we are, right here meeting halfway between Congress and the White House. And I want to ask a question about U.S. policy. The U.S. obviously has a lot of interests in the region, but if the U.S. wanted to prioritize advancing human rights, respect for human rights, in Tunisia, but I want to broaden it also for Bob and Robin in other countries that we've been talking about today, what should the United States be doing and what should it not be doing?
You answer that.
Oh, now I have to answer that? Oh, okay. Well, I mean, picking up on some things that have been said here, I would say that the United States should not be dealing with Islamic countries as Islamic countries. They should be dealing with countries as countries, and should be doing its best. And someone mentioned the United States has double standards and is hypocritical, and the answer is absolutely. So are all governments, unfortunately. People too, I think, actually. But we have to try to be as consistent as possible, especially because I do think that actually our interests are very much wrapped up in whether these governments continue to move in a democratic direction or not. I don't think this is just idealism. I think this is actually based on history, that even if there are sort of short-term strategic setbacks that we can all point to, I think in the long term, maybe even in the medium term, the establishment of stable democracies is in America's interest. And again, that requires that we not move from having a great relationship to the last dictator to having a great and unquestioning relationship to the new dictator, if that's what's going to happen, but that we try not to make the mistakes of the past and hold everybody to the same standards that we have, that we have always tried, at least aspired to hold ourselves to. I guess, Robin, I'm the only one who's going to answer that question.
I agree.
Oh, okay. Well, it was
yeah, I think that the United States has to continue in this direction. It starts with helping and with supporting democracy promotion in the region. We think that it is important for us to have this long-term commitment to support these nascent democracies and to support these people because it is a long-term work in the perspective of long-term work, not just matter of some short time, or we have now some difficulties, so we change the perspective. I think that is important to help the government. We have now an Islamic government, but Islamic and secular, because we have a coalition between secular and Islamic forces in Tunisia. But we think we have to deal also with countries, with governments, without any any difference between the identity of those who are in power. I think those who are in power are very pragmatic, are wanting to succeed in their mission. They want to deliver something to their people, and I think it is also maybe more difficult to deal with this democratic elected people than with dictators, but it is an American interest, as you said, to deal with them and to help them succeed, because if they succeed, I think the region will succeed, and I hope all the world will benefit from this significant change towards democracy.
Well, thank you very much, and let's thank our two panelists, Zied and Robin. Thank you.